Hi, and welcome back to another AnyRPG Development Livestream. In these videos, I livestream the development of the AnyRPG Engine, a free and open source role-playing game engine designed in Unity and written in C#. If you don't already have a copy of AnyRPG, you can pick one up from anyrpg.org/downloads in both Unity package and source code format. You can also find free copies of the games that I work on for download at the same page. In this episode, we will be adding pressure plate switches to the Temple of Ancient Energy dungeon, which is based on this free asset from the Unity Asset Store, the Cartoon Temple Building Kit Lite. And one of the things that I really love about this asset is that it has a couple of prefab rooms like this. And so since the last episode, in addition to like this just massive building block set, which is also really cool. So since the last episode, I have added some more of those prefab rooms to the dungeon. So you can see that we've got this original entrance room and the room with the bridges, and then I have added in this room, which was also another prefab included with the set. And what we're going to do is we've got these blocks lined up here, and the character's going to have to push this block over onto this pressure plate and push this block over onto this pressure plate. And then when he moves into the next room, we're going to make it a little more complicated. You'll see that we've got this leaf sign on the wall here, and all of the existing blocks that are against this wall are leaves, and this block right here that looks like the player should just push it over is actually a cross, so this block will not activate that. And we'll do the same thing on this side. These are all crosses, and we'll need to push a cross box instead of this leaf box over here that's sort of conveniently placed to trick the character. So we're going to do that by having basically minimum weights. So one of these things will require like a 25 kilogram block, and the other one will require a 50 kilogram block. So that's what we're going to be doing in this episode. And I've got my player in the level here, so you can see I've already set all this stuff up, and I just have to make sure that these aren't static objects, add ridges bodies to them so we can push them around, and then we'll add the pressure plate class. So let's get started on that. To do that, we will need to basically have a new type of control switch. So we have the control switch class. We'll make sure we grab the one that's in the AnyRPG. And this type of control switch, it's actually going to be a child class of control switch, and it will be called pressure switch. So let's just go to the folder where control switch is located. Control D to duplicate the file, and call this one pressure switch. Alright, double click to open it, and then this will be pressure switch, and it will inherit from control switch. The pressure switch will need a couple of properties, such as minimum weight. So this will be a private float minimum weight. And the minimum amount of weight needed to activate this switch. And that's actually, I think, pretty much all that we're going to need to do for now. And for the interact, let's let's see, what we want to do here is call the base method after performing a weight check. And the weight check will be based on the amount of weight inside of the interactable that this is attached to inside of its basically collider. So let's take out these because we don't need them. And we'll need to make sure that we've actually got a reference to the collider. So if, let's see, interactable, because this is available to us through the base class, dot, and I don't know if we actually have an exposed reference to the interactables collider, so let's go to the definition of interactable here. And the box collider here is private. So let's just expose that. And now we can refer to that. So if the interactables box collider is not null, then we need to perform a check. And let's see, we can actually get rid of that as well. And that, because all that's done in the base method. Okay, so now we need to basically check for rigid bodies that are inside of the box collider and then add up their weight. So to do that, we need to basically do a physics.boxcast. So I think we already do that somewhere in our code. So let's hit Control-Shift-F and just look for boxcast. I forget what the method is called. Let's just okay, we actually do have boxcast. But I'm apparently not using it. So it's actually physics dot, I think. Let's see if I can find it. Overlap box. I think that's what I call it. There we go. Okay. This is the hitbox code that I'm using, so basically I want to do exactly this right here. We'll take that piece of code and we'll put it inside of the pressure switch. And then we want to do an overlap box at the myBoxCollider.center, I believe. And then an overlap box uses half extents. So what we want is interactable.myBoxCollider, and then we need to get its extents basically. And let's just see what's available to us here. extents is deprecated. So I think we actually want bounds. And this is, I think, the one we want. Bounds.extents. And this is always half of the size of the bounds. Okay. That should work, I think. So what we want to do is that'll basically grab everything inside of this physics overlap box. Now we want to go check everything inside of the box, and we want to basically add up its weight. So what we'll do is we'll make a new float called total weight, set it to 0, and if the game object that we hit .get component, and we want to try to grab a rigid body because that's what's going to tell us whether or not this thing has mass on it. And actually, why don't we just assign that so we can use it as well? So what we'll do is make a rigid body, and that'll be equal to the get component call. And if our rigid body does not equal null, then we're going to add its weight to the total weight. So total weight plus equals rigid body dot, and let's see what the property is called here. Mass. Okay, and this is a float, perfect. So then at the very end of this, we now have the total weight. And if the, let's see, total weight is greater than or equal to the minimum weight, then we are allowed to interact with it. So let's save that, and now we should actually be able to interact with the switch. So let's go ahead and test that out. Now we've actually got to go into the game and add that to something. So we'll go into the temple of ancient energy level here, and we will create a pressure switch. So over here in our initial pressure switch room, I'm just going to middle click to focus there, and then not create an empty, whoops, I want to create a new 3D object cube. And that's about right, pretty much. We want objects to pretty much go into this sphere here. We will remove the mesh renderer. Actually, you know what? I'll just leave it on for now where we're working with this. I'm going to call this, let's see, idle switch 1. And we'll make the box collider into a trigger. We will add an interactable to this. This one is not going to glow on mouse over. We'll make sure that it's a trigger. I might have to add some code to basically suppress the mouse over from this, but this will do for now. In order to give us an indication that maybe something should go over here, I'm just going to click on the idle object below here, and I'm going to uncheck static from it to make it a completely non-static object so that we can basically push through it and it won't get lights that way. We'll go back to our little cube here. And we'll add the component pressure switch. It'll have 0 prerequisite conditions. Let's set the minimum weight to 25 kilograms. And for now, it's not going to control any objects. I'm just going to put in a debug message basically letting us know that that the weight is high enough. So here we're just going to say weight and then add in the total weight. Save that. And then now I want to go to my UMA player unit and just make sure that his rigid body actually has some weight on it. So here's my default UMA player unit and my rigid body, and he has a mass of 50, so that should be enough to actually activate this. So let's save that, and you know what, I'm even just going to keep the mesh render attached to it because the box collider is a trigger. So then let's go to the load game manager. And press play. And we'll load up our Chapter 2 tester over here in the Temple of Ancient Energy. Okay, perfect. So we interacted with it. And let's just check our console here. Interestingly enough, I don't actually see the pressure switch interactable. So that's actually because our control switch is set to do nothing if there's no objects to control. So I think we need to remove the check for if there's 0 of them. And I think also we need to just put this block of code pretty much around here. So we're going to remove that, and we'll put the for each loop inside of it because we want this to run basically no matter what. So if control objects does not equal null, then we can do that. Okay, and this should allow us to at least fire that interaction. Let's just, this is pressure switch.interact. And I think in control switch, I don't know if we have a can interact method. No. So let's try that again and just see if this actually gets triggered here. Hey, the Epic Spire, just to answer your question here. So the armor shown on the character right now is UMA armor, which means it'll work on UMA units, but I think you'd have trouble attaching it to non-UMA units. I'm not particularly sure about that. It's not something I've ever tried, though. So I see the interact here. But what I don't see is the weight. So let's just put some more debugs in here. And it's likely maybe we didn't have hit colliders. So let's just see how many hit colliders we had. Okay. Let's let that compile and try that again. Okay, so basically the thing had a box collider. For some reason though, the pressure switch did not detect any hit colliders when it did its box cast. So to figure out why, I guess we need to see when it performs this overlap box here. Okay. Here's the problem. Basically, this is the object's local space here. So we actually need to perform this in world space, basically, because overlap box is probably almost definitely in world space. So in that case, what we want to do is, I think, interactable.transform point from local space to world space. And we want to transform the box's center. And then let's just put a debug message. And let's see, we want to know basically the interactables center. So we'll do interactable.transform.position. Actually just dot position. Okay, let's save that and try that again. So we'll load up the game, load up our tester. Okay, cool. That was a lot better message. We hit 5 objects. We hit the ground, the idle switch, the interactable range, and the player unit. Perfect. So now that we hit the player unit, it looks like we're not finding the player unit's rigid body. So let's just add some more debugs here. The weight, we want to know total weight, and we want to know minimum weight. And this is the problem, actually. We don't need to be returning anything right there. That's why we didn't see the message. Okay, good. So let's save that and try that one more time. And this time we should actually get a message telling us what the total weight was on that switch. So we'll run over towards the switch. Okay, that's a lot better. So now we can see that the total weight was 50, the minimum weight was 25, and we know that we interacted with it because it properly closed the window and we didn't see any window there. So this is good. Now what we want to do is actually have this trigger the door to open. And we also want to make it so that we can push that block around. So let's load up the level. We'll go to the Temple of Ancient Energy. And I'm going to go to the scene, hit F to focus. Those are the wrong idols. Hit F to focus on the idle switch here. And then we'll want to make this idle here not light map static and not, no, you know what? It's just going to be not static at all. Not static for anything. Okay, and then he has a mesh collider on him. We'll need to add a rigid body to him so that we can push him around and give him some weight. We'll make him 25 kilograms. He gets to use gravity, and we're going to freeze his X and Z rotations so that we can't accidentally tip him over. He'll just be standing up straight the entire time. Okay, that's good. Now let's see here. So we want to push this block over and have that thing activate the door. So now that the block is pushable, let's go and make this door openable here. So this door consists of two blocks, and we're basically going to have the bottom block move down and the top block move up. So what I'll do here is I'm going to create a new empty. I'm going to reset the, actually I don't need to reset the transform on this. So this is going to be basically the door, let's call it the idle door. And the idle door is going to have the same location as this block right here. So we need to copy the component, go over to the idle door, and paste the component values. Now, the idle door itself has to basically spawn some animated objects, so we need to make some animated objects out of this thing. To see how we're doing that already, we have a bridge container. So let's go hit F to focus on the bridge container here. And you can see basically the bridge container has a prefab profile, the ancient temple bridge, and it's going to move that thing between upwards and downwards states. So what we want to do basically is put an animated object and an interactable onto the idle door. I'm going to call this idle door bottom, and we will copy the animated object component. Paste component is new onto the idle door bottom. We will copy the interactable component and right click, paste component is new on the bottom of this. The prefab profile name will be idle door bottom, and everything else should be okay. So now all we need to do is actually make an idle door bottom. So I'll hit F to focus on that, and we need to basically make it out of one of these blocks here. So I'm going to select to go to this block. I'm going to Control D to duplicate it. And we will call this the AnyRPG block 3x3. Then we'll need to make a prefab profile that says where this thing's position is going to be. So to do that, I believe we have like a bridge prefab profile, this ancient temple bridge short here. I'm going to Control D to duplicate that, and we'll call that the ancient temple idle door bottom. And up here, call it the ancient temple idle door bottom. For the prefab, we will use AnyRPG block 3x3. The default position of it will be 0, and the open position will be whatever we determine it as downwards. Let me just see here. We'll take the block right now. We will move it into the idle door bottom. And then if we move it down so it's invisible, we had to move it down by basically 4.3. So in the ancient temple idle door bottom, the open position is negative 4.3. We'll duplicate that, and we'll do the same thing for the top. Our ancient temple idle door top. We'll set that to ancient temple idle door top. Use the same block, and the sheath position will be 0. Just going to go back into the scene now. Whoops. Okay. Back into the scene, and then reset the transform back to 0. Okay, so now what we want to do is I'm going to Control D to duplicate the idle door bottom. I'm going to call it the idle door top. And then for the idle door top, I'm actually going to set it to the position of the top block. So we'll take this top block right here. It's no longer static. And I'm going to copy the component. Then I'm going to go down to the idle door top, and I'm going to paste the component values so the transform is at exactly the right spot. I'm going to remove the, actually I'll just keep that block in there for now. So the block is at 0, and when the door opens and the block slides up, it's going to be at 5.14. So we'll go to the ancient temple idle door top and set the Y value to 5. Just 5.2 is fine. Okay, so now we have the correct prefab values for those. Uncheck the block. Uncheck the block. We don't need that one anymore. All right, now what I'll want to do is basically these are both interactables. We don't want to interact with them directly though. we want basically a control switch to control these. I think for now, actually, just to test really quickly if the wait thing is working, we will interact with these directly. So on the idle switch here, we'll create two control objects and just have idle door bottom and idle door top. We're going to change this a little bit though, but I just want to test it first and just make sure that we can push the block around and that we can activate the door. Let's go back to the load game manager and press play. Alright, so that was actually kind of funny that that block basically just fell right through the ground. Also, either my doors haven't spawned. Oh, you know what? I think that's just because in the level I don't even think I set the proper objects. So we have this error message here about non-kinematic rigid body. And couldn't find the prefab idle door bottom. So that's definitely the issue. Let's go back to the Temple of Ancient Energy level. And this is the Ancient Temple idle door bottom that it should be looking for. And this is the Ancient Temple idle door top that it should be looking for. Let's save that, and then we have to fix that idle block. So we'll go back into the scene, and this guy right here, I'm going to put him and do his own container. So this is going to be pushable idle 1, and let's just drag him out here, and then we have to make him convex. And for some reason he managed to fall through the ground. I wonder maybe if I just like move him up a little bit above the ground. Okay, let's save that and then reload the game and see if that's working. Okay, that's better. So it didn't fall through the ground this time. However, I still feel like those didn't spawn. If I hit F to focus on the block, actually it looks like the block did spawn, but it spawned, I think I actually have the values mixed up there. This is its down position that it's in right now, so I just have to swap basically the values on those. Doesn't prevent us from testing this though. Awesome, I can push the block. Okay, very cool. Alright, so the first thing I notice here is that it's not able to slide over this thing, so I think I actually have to remove the collider from this so that I can push it over there. Ooh, I can actually like push it sideways too here, rotate it. Okay, so let's go fix those two things. We'll fix the door prefabs, and we'll fix that that block there. Alright, so this idle right here needs to have its mesh collider removed. And now we'll be able to push this one sort of through that thing over there. When we look at the idle door bottom and idle door top, we need to swap ancient temple idle. No wonder I spelled it wrong. Idle door top. Okay, that's supposed to say idle. Alright, so what I'm going to do basically is negative 4.3 goes down to the sheath position. And then for the top door, 5.2 goes down to the sheath position. Okay, let's save that and go back to the load game manager. Load up the temple here. Okay, that's better. So now we've got basically these doors are engaged and we can't get through. If I go over here and step on it, they opened, but that's not what we want. Basically, we want this thing to close the door as soon as we exit the pressure plate. So right now, the pressure plate doesn't have any way of knowing that something's exited it, and we need to write some code to make that happen. So our interactable basically has like an on trigger enter. Right here. But it doesn't have an on trigger exit, I don't think. Let's just confirm that. Yeah, so we don't have on trigger exit. So we'll make a public void on trigger exit. And we'll basically just copy all that code. You know what I think? Yeah, you know what? We're just going to copy that all for now. We have to add a different condition in there. So right here, this code is actually attempting to figure out if it was a player that interacted with it. because that's the way that the interaction system works. We actually need to change this a little bit. So I think for the interactable, we need a new switch here, basically. And what we need to do is basically allow an interaction with any collider, not just a player collider. So I think I'll add a new serialized field for that. And we're going to call that a private bool interact with any. And that'll be false by default. And if it's true, we can trigger interaction on anything that has a collider, not just players. So then we'll write an else statement here. And actually this should be an else if. If we can trigger on any or interact with any, basically, then we want to interact with this object and basically send in the player's game object. Actually, no, we want to do it a slightly different way. Okay. If we can interact with any, then we want to actually just call, I believe, the interact method directly. Yeah. The player won't be considered to interact with this thing in the normal sense, pretty much. So, character unit source. We'll just be calling interact. And we're first going to check if the player manager.myInstance.myCharacter, which is a player character, and we need a character unit. Then we will just have this thing basically interact with the player, even though technically we could be interacting with a rock, but that's just going to be the easiest way to do it. To do that, let's see, because this is on trigger enter, we already know that the thing that ran into us had a collider, so that's okay. Now, on trigger exit, let's see, I think I want another Boolean for that as well. And we'll set a serialized field here that will be default false, and it'll be a private bool interact on exit equals false. And this is basically interact on trigger exit, not just on trigger enter. So then basically if is trigger and interact on exit is true. Then we want to basically do the exact same thing here. The same else if statement. Okay, I might put those into a common method later because it looks like the code is identical. Perfect, so now we'll be able to perform the interaction. The next thing that we need is basically a state management to let us know if we're in an on state or an off state, because essentially right now if we exit it will trigger the door, but what we want is we only want to move it between two defined states. We don't want, like, let's say for example you require like 25 kilograms and something leaves that doesn't bring you below that weight. You want to stay in the state that you're in. So this means that our control switches now need to keep track of basically their state. So this will be a new private bool. It'll be called onState and it'll be false by default. So basically can be on or off. And we're going to use that calculation of what state it's in to basically switch back and forth on the pressure switch. So right here, when we perform the interact, the first thing we want to do basically is, let's see, we want to swap the state. So on state equals not on state, which will basically swap it from true to false or false to true. And this is not really going to matter a whole lot in the control switch generally, but on the pressure switch it makes a big difference. So what we want to do here is, if total weight is greater than minimum weight, and actually we don't want this to be private, we want it to be a protected bool so that we can access it. We'll save that, go back to the pressure switch class, and if total weight is greater than minimum weight and on state is false, then we can interact with it to turn it on. And if we interact with it, we'll switch between states automatically in the base class, so that's good. If the total weight is less than the minimum weight and on state is true, then we're also going to interact with it. So this will prevent us from randomly switching between states when something leaves it, but there's still enough weight on top of it. I think that'll be good. Let's just check if there's any errors with that code. Alright, so we'll press play now. Alright, so the door is closed. If I wander over there, I think the door opened. Yeah, looks good. Now if I wander off of it, the door should close again, but it didn't. And that's basically because I totally forgot to check the trigger on exit box. So let's go back to the Temple of Ancient Energy here. We'll go down to idle switch 1. For the interactable, we will allow interactions with any, and we will also allow interactions on exit. Let's save that. And then go back to the load game manager. And now hopefully we will see that the player, when he steps off of this thing, no longer triggers it. Or I mean, the doors are no longer open, basically, that they close again right away. So this is interesting because there's 3 hit colliders, but the player's not in it anymore. Okay, this time we caught the player. And when we exited, then they are indeed closed again. We'll want to do something about that window there, because that actually shouldn't be showing up. Now, let's see what happens if we push this box over top. I see idle wait 25, and the door is open. Okay, cool. So that's good news. Okay, now let's push the idle off of it. So I think this actually has to do with the window being open. I think it doesn't allow you to interact while that window is open, and we actually don't want that window basically to show at all. So I think what we need to do here is basically we should also close the window here. So let's just make this an else if statement. And if we didn't match any of those, we're just going to close the window. And let's just try that and see how that works. Okay, so we'll run over. We'll step on the switch. I think the door opened. We'll leave the switch, and I just saw it sliding down there. Perfect. We'll push this guy over onto it. And the door opened. We'll push him off, and the door closed. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have solved the pressure switch issue. Yeah, very cool. Okay. Next up, we want to basically make it so that we have to put both of these guys on their pads in order for the door to open. So let's go ahead and do that now. To do that, we need to add some new functionality to the control switch. And it's going to be basically a switch group. So what is going to have to happen here with this control switch is when the control switch interacts, then let's see, then basically we want to keep track of additional control switches and their states and make sure they're all in the right state so that we can require multiples. So for this, we'll make a new serialized field, and this will be a private list of control switch, and we're just going to call this switch group equals new list of control switch. And we'll just make a note here that all these switches must be in the on state for this switch to activate. So we'll save that, and let's see how I want to do this here. Basically, we need to go into the level and we need to add that as a master switch for that door panel. So to add it as a master switch for the door panel, we need to load up the level. go over to the Temple of Ancient Energy here. We will look at the idle door bottom. We'll go to the scene, hit F to focus on it, and I'm just going to Control D to duplicate the idle door bottom. We're going to call this the idle door switch. The idle door switch will not itself have any prefab profiles nor any blocks. The idle door top and bottom will go into the idle door switch. The idle door switch doesn't need an animated object. And we're going to add the component to it, control switch, making sure that we add the right one. That's the right one, good. The control switch will control the objects, the idle door bottom, and the idle door top. It'll have switch group, idle switch 1, and idle switch 2. We're going to take idle switch 2, we're going to put it over right here, so middle click and then Control Alt F. Actually, you know what? Control Z. Because I want this at the same height, I'm just going to pull this over manually, basically. Okay. So then we want to take this idle right here and do the same thing we did with the other one. It doesn't need a mesh collider. And we're going to mark it as non-static so that it doesn't get lighting data. We're going to take this idle right here, make sure that it's convex, and then add, and actually, you know what? This is going to be pushable idle 2, and we're going to pull it out so that it pops down to the bottom there by pushable idle 1. We're going to copy the rigid body component from pushable idle 1, and paste component is new, so we have the rigid body with 25 mass on this guy. That should be all that's needed. So now basically for idle switch 2, I'm going to remove the mesh renderer here so it's invisible. I'm going to remove the mesh renderer from idle switch 1. The control objects for pressure switch is now going to be the idle door switch instead. And the control objects for idle switch 2 is now just the idle door switch. So what happens is both of these can trigger the idle door switch, but the idle door switch, because it has a switch group attached to it, and is monitoring idle switch 1 and idle switch 2, it won't actually activate the doors until both of these switches are considered to be in the on state. Let's just go back here to the code, and now in the control switch, when we interact, we'll move this close window method up here, and what we want to do is if our control group, switch group, if our switch group does not equal null, and our switch group does not equal actually switch group dot count is greater than 0, then we want to check we're going to set a new int called active switches equals 0. Then for each control switch in our switch group, if control switch dot, and I think I have to do expose that parameter here, on state, yeah. So quick actions and refactoring and encapsulate field. This will be protected bool. Actually, this is protected, and this one is public. If control switch.my on state, then active switches plus plus. And at the very end of this, if active switches is equal to the count of the switch group, then actually what we want to do is instead, if active switches is less than the switch group dot count, then we just want to return false right away. Okay, that should work. Now our final control switch should only activate if both of the switches in our switch group were properly active. The next thing I want to do is make those things on the ground a little more obvious. Let's just go back to our console, make sure we have no errors. And I'm just going to generate the lighting here, because what should happen is these things should be a little darker and a little more visible because they're no longer light map static. Yeah, that's sort of the effect I'm looking at there. Basically, yeah, sorry, don't mind the stream if apparently we've got dropped frames because baking the light maps in Unity puts a pretty good drain on the resources. Okay, just waiting for baking to complete here. Oh, you know what? I actually need to rebake this because this guy over here is not supposed to be static. And actually, What I want to do is I want to take these three idles down here, and I want to make all of them non-static as well. Because I want all those bases to be brown, basically. Okay, so I'm going to let that light rebake again. And then while that light's baking, we might as well start setting up the next scene here. So actually I want to do the exact same thing in this room right here. I want to take all of these blocks under the bottom, and then the ones on this side as well. And I want to make all these non-static. And actually I want to turn off their mesh colliders also. And in fact, let's see, we want to make it so that we can push these things around. So this block here, this block up here, this block right here, this block over here in the corner. None of these should be static. And they will need convex mesh colliders as well as rigid bodies. We're going to set the mass on all of them to 25 and then freeze the X and Z rotations. We'll allow them to use gravity. And then we'll want to add control switches. So we have idle switch 1. I'm going to control D to duplicate that. I'm going to middle click right here. I'm going to hit control alt F to bring the new one over here. And I am going to call this one block switch 1. Block switch 1 will be the leaves. Which will require a minimum weight of 25. I'm then going to middle click on the ground over here. I'm going to control D to duplicate block switch 1. I'm going to call it block switch 2. Block switch 2 will be the crosses, which will require a minimum weight of 50. I'm then going to hit control alt F to bring the block switch 2 over here. Then we need to manage the door. So at the very end of this, before we can get into the final room and fight the final boss, we'll need to open up this door. So this door is basically exactly the same as the other door. So I think the easiest thing to do is going to be just control D to duplicate the idle door switch. The idle door switch will be renamed to the block door switch. Then we'll change this to the block door bottom and the block door top. I'm going to take this as the base for it. So this block right here, I'm just going to copy this component's transform. Then I'm going to go over to the block door switch, and I am going to paste the component values. Then I can just disable these two blocks. And because it's exactly the same as the idle door pretty much, the thing should slide up and down perfectly. So then the block door switch is controlling the block door top and the block door bottom, which is good. We have called the idle door bottom as the objects, but that's fine because they're just relative to this thing's position anyway. For the switch group though, we will need to switch that to the block switch 1 and the block switch 2. Alright, I keep on disabling objects, which keeps on causing the light map to get recreated. That's fine. So for the single cube right here, we want to give this guy a mass of 50 because cross cubes need to be 50. And there's another cross cube up here, and this one also needs to have a mass of 50. So now only the cross cubes can activate basically the cross box. The cross cube technically will be able to activate the leaf box as well. Not a big deal though. As long as you at least get one cross over on the cross side, then you should be able to open the door. So I think that's pretty much everything that needs to be done for this level. Let's go into interactables here, and we'll just move all this stuff into the interactables container. So all of these idles and switches will head into there. Alright, we'll just wait for this lighting job to finish baking here, and once it's done, we should be able to go in and test this out. This is good. I'm liking the way that these things are darker, sort of indicating that, you know, there's something suspicious and we should check this out. It's like a little bit of a visual indicator to the player. We won't be able to push these blocks around, but that's fine. And that lighting just takes like an amazing amount of time to bake here. Alright, good. Looks like the stream has stopped dropping frames, so just waiting for these last 108, 106 jobs to complete. And then we'll go test out all the changes. I think maybe in the meantime, actually, it might be kind of cool to make a couple more timeline cutscenes. So I think I'm going to do that actually. We'll go create timeline, and we will call this new timeline the Temple of Ancient Energy, and the first one is the idle door. And then I'll hit Control D to duplicate that and call this next one the block door. Let's open up a new timeline tab. By going Window, Sequencing, Timeline. We'll pull it down to the bottom here. We have a Bridge 1 timeline controller that basically has a playable director on it. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate that. And I'm going to call this new one the idle door timeline controller. Attach it to the idle door timeline. Then I'm going to Control D to duplicate it. And I am going to create the block door timeline controller and attach it to the block door timeline. We won't be playing these on Awake. For the cutscene name, we have Ancient Temple Bridge 1. I'm going to set that to the Ancient Temple block door. And the idle door timeline controller will be the Ancient Temple idle door. We'll save those. See, we want to look for those. So we have the Ancient Temple Bridge 1, which is the cutscene. We're going to Control D to duplicate that. Call it the Ancient Temple idle door. Set this to the Ancient Temple idle door. And the timeline name is Temple of Ancient Energy idle door. Control D to duplicate that cutscene and make the Ancient Temple block door. Set the title here to the Ancient Temple block door, and here set it to the Temple of Ancient Energy block door. Okay, that looks good. The lighting is finally done baking, so let's save the scene. And now what we want to do is activate these timelines with the switches. So if you see the bridge control switch cross, control switch sun symbol is controlling the bridge 1 timeline controller. So the idle door switch should control the idle door timeline controller, and the block door switch should control the block door timeline controller. Now we want to really quickly just go in and activate and deactivate the camera during these cutscenes. So here we are in the block door room, and we want to be facing the right direction because the door that opens is over here. So let's just position the camera sort of right here so we can see this thing open up. And then I'm going to go to my timeline camera here and go game object align to view. And now the camera's exactly where I just was. So the next thing we want to do is go to the block door timeline itself, lock the inspector, and now we want to pull down the correct camera, specifically the one that's called main camera. We'll add an activation track here. Under the activation track, we want to bind the main camera. Then let's just look at the other timeline controller here. What else did we have? We had the animator, so we will want to also add an animation track. So on the block door timeline controller, we will pull down the main camera again and choose add animation track, binding that to the main camera. Unlock the inspector and lock it back up again, and now we can see these objects that they're bound to properly in there. And then what we want to do is basically just double click there, recording. Okay. We want to take the main camera right here, and we just want to pull it over so that it's facing at the right spot. So let's go back to here, because this is where we want it to be looking, sort of down this hallway right here, and go game object align with view. Perfect. Now we're going to pull the timeline signal. Actually, you know what? We don't even need any other keyframes because it'll just basically stay there the entire time. Perfect. So now we stop recording, and now our camera should be active for the length, which is about 5 seconds. Okay. Next up, we want to basically do the exact same thing for the idle door, make a timeline for it so that the camera can jump over and look at the idle door. So we will go to the idle door timeline controller, unlock the inspector, position ourselves over here where we want to watch the idle door open like this. That looks pretty good. Then we will take the main camera, drag it on, add it as an activation track. We'll take the main camera again, add it as an animation track. We will hit record and go game object, select the main camera first, then go game object align with view. Now we have a keyframe. Now we can stop recording. Now the last thing that we want to do is basically add a timeline signal at the end of this. So if we look at the bridge timeline controller, under the camera here we've added a signal at the end which does a end cutscene. So we want to do the same thing for the idle door. So right here, we're going to right click, we're going to add signal emitter. The emit signal is going to be end cutscene, and it's going to call end cutscene on the camera controller. Perfect. So then set that time to 5 seconds. Okay, we want to do the same thing for that was the idle door. Now we want to do the same thing for the block door. So we're going to right click here, we're going to choose add signal emitter, we're going to emit the signal end cutscene, which will tell the main camera controller to end the cutscene. We'll set that time to 5 seconds. And let's hit save, because I think we have everything we need in place to properly display the cutscenes. We're going to make sure the main camera is deactive, so that's good. And let's go back to the load game manager and test this all out now. So I'm just going to adjust the sound a little bit here. Turn the effects volume up a little bit. Turn the UI volume up a little bit. Turn the music up a little bit. That looks good. Let's load up our game. And could not find cutscene, ancient temple, idle door. Right, because I spelled idle wrong. This is I-D-O-L, door. Save that and reload the game. Okay, so now I've got 2 blocks. I can push them around. We got 1 idle switch complete. Cutscene comes in, door opens. Now that both idle switches are on, it's exactly what we're looking for. You know what? I want to just test and see if I push this idle switch off here. Do I get the cutscene again? Ah, so interestingly enough, we didn't trigger. Okay. So this is a little bit interesting. I see what happened here, basically. So individually, each of those things is only set to trigger if its weight is correct. Okay, so let's see what happened here. We push the thing off the pressure switch. At which point it should have attempted to interact. At which point it should have contacted the door switch and told the door to close. Now the door switch is a control switch. And wouldn't have interacted because of the fact that now there was less switches. So essentially, we only want this condition to run when we are attempting to turn the thing on. So we need to actually add a new condition to this, and that is basically if onState is true, if onState is false, and active switches is less than the switch count, then just return false. Otherwise, if onState is true, let's see. If onState is true, and the active switch count is greater than equal to the switch group count, we don't want to interact. We want to just remain in the on state. So we need another if statement there basically, and if on state is true, and the active switches is greater than equal to the switch group dot count, then we also want to just do nothing. Otherwise, if both of those conditions are false, then we have to switch the state. So let's try that again. And this time we just need to make sure that when we push the idle off the block, the door closes. So run over, push the idle on top of the block, push the other idle on top of the block, door opens, push the idle off the block, door closes. Alright, cool. I'm happy with that. Now I just got to get this idle back onto the block so I can go into the other room there. Cool, there we go, and doors open. Alright, this is working. This is working exactly the way I want it. Perfect. So now let's go solve the next puzzle and do the boxes with the different weights. So we're going to run down this nice dark hallway into the next room. And we can see over here we've got the leaf wall. And we have a cross box. We'll go put the cross box over here. We'll go push the leaf box over onto the cross wall. And theoretically, nothing should happen. I've just stopped my character from running up that thing. Okay, good. So nothing happened, exactly as we expected. And now we want to go find ourselves a cross box and put it over there. So there's a cross box up here, and I'm just going to try pushing this down the stairs and see if that works. Okay, good. I can push it around. Push the thing down the stairs here. Love the physics here. Okay, good. And okay, so this should actually work because we've got a cross over here. And the crossover on the leaf box should be more than enough to activate it. But I don't see that happening. Alright, so I think I have to exit the game here and just check what's going on there. Let's go back into the scene here. So we'll go to the Temple of Ancient Energy scene. And we'll make sure that everything is set up properly here. So let's go into the scene. We'll go to the idle room here. We'll just check out this thing. It's got a convex mesh collider and a rigid body with the rotation on X and Z frozen. And a mass of 50. This box right here, X and Z rotation frozen, mass of 50, convex mesh collider. This one right here, rigid body 25, X and Z frozen, convex collider, and finally the leaf up here. Everything looks okay. Alright, so then let's see if it's the switches maybe. So this block switch 1 has a minimum weight of 25 Oh, and you know what? That's why it's controlling the idle door switch. We need to make it control the block door switch. And block switch 2 also needs to control the block door switch. I think that was pretty much the only issue in there. And then let's just make sure the block door switch controls the block door timeline. Perfect. And it has block switch 1 and 2 as its switch group. So both of those need to be active. Okay, I think that'll do it. So let's reload the game here. Go back to the load game manager. Press play. Alright, so we're going to put a cross on... Actually, you know what? Yeah, it's fine. Just push the cross here over to the leaf box. You know what? I don't understand. This box was supposed to have its X and Z rotation frozen in it, and yet somehow I managed to shove it over. I don't get what happened there. Okay, so let's just push it up onto this thing. That's good. It's still got enough weight. That'll work. It's kind of funny, but okay. And then when we push the leaf over onto the cross box, it should not have the correct amount of weight. Alright, good. Total weight 25, minimum weight 50, so we don't have enough weight to open the door yet. Good, so we're going to go grab another one of these cross boxes. Just give this thing a shove until we get it down the stairs. I'm gonna do some fixes in a little while to fix the whole walking up walls thing and make it so that the character does not do that. I just have to implement some logic to do some downward raycast to check if an object is actually short enough for him to step over. Okay, so we are going to push the incorrect... Whoa, oh, you know what? That's hilarious. Do you know why the door opened? The door opened because my player's weight plus the weight of the box was actually enough to trigger it. However, now the door did not close. And actually now the door closed, which was a little bit weird. Okay. I think potentially Unity missed like a collision there. We'll worry about that later, but anyway, if we push that box back on, cool. Now we have opened the door to the final hallway. So we can walk down here, climb up the stairs, and then head down to the boss room. And I have to figure out what's the issue with the lighting in this room, because the lighting just isn't working properly. But now we've gone all the way through our puzzle dungeon by pushing around things on pressure plates and using pressure plate groups. So as always, I hope you enjoyed that. That was definitely fun making this episode. And if you did enjoy it, then don't forget to thumbs up the video, subscribe to the AnyRPG YouTube channel, or just leave a note in the comments. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.